Dia ou noite? Exatas ou humanas? Cidade ou campo? Poder fazer escolhas significa conquistar um dos maiores desejos da humanidade, a independência. E o Sebrae acredita que empreender é uma porta para a independência, que está aberta para as pessoas de todas as idades, gêneros e que buscam mais opções para suas vidas. Para o Sebrae, tão importante quanto incentivar negócios a darem certo é apoiar pessoas que transformam sonhos em projetos de vida, que ajudam a gerar empregos, desenvolver a sua comunidade e a transmitir a cultura empreendedora no país. Um lugar onde todos têm liberdade para escolher, inclusive escolher empreender. Sebrae, a força do empreendedor brasileiro.
A moda da Malve não tem ponto final, igual a sua. Nós acreditamos que pequenas atitudes transformam o mundo. Quer mais atitude do que mudar o seu jeito de escolher? Moda inteligente, feita de um jeito mais sustentável que reflete o seu estilo. Uma peça de roupa pode viver muitas histórias, por muito tempo. Não é sobre ser descartável. É sobre você e sobre o mundo. Malve, moda sem ponto final.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Happy World Environment Day. I am Carol Perlinger, co-founder of Real Ethical Fashion, and we are very happy to have you with us today. This is the last day of our forum, unfortunately, but we still have many interesting discussions taking place in the afternoon, so please stay with us. We're now going to start a session powered by EcoAge. Andrew Morgan, who's the director of True Cost, and EcoAge founder Livia Firth have recently released Fashionscapes, A Living Wage, which is the fourth in the investigative short documentary series available on EcoAge TV. And the movie has been supported by The Circle and North Sales as well. So today we will be watching this short documentary, and then we will have a conversation with three amazing women who are involved in this project. So I would like to welcome Jessica Simor, human rights and environmental lawyer, and also a member of The Circle. Marisa Selfa, CEO of North Sales Apparel, and Harriet Vocking, who's the chief brand officer at EcoAge, who will be moderating this session. Welcome to Real Ethical Fashion. Harriet, over to you.
Thank you so much, and happy World Environment Day to everybody as well. Let me start first by giving apologies from Livia Firth and Andrew Morgan, who both really wanted to be here today, but they couldn't because it's a Saturday and they had various family commitments. But if you have any specific questions for them or anything, please do send them through and we'll make sure that they answer them for you, because I know that they'd be delighted to, and they were very sad they couldn't make it. So just before we start, I thought I'd give you a little bit of background into this movie and why it was so important to make it. So earlier this month, a powerful partnership had been created between The Circle, which is the global NGO which was founded by Annie Lennox, Livia, the founder of EcoAge, and the group of lawyers from The Circle led by Jessica, which brought together the first coordinated challenge to international law to implement a new EU legislation with the potential to lift millions of garment workers out of poverty. To really highlight this and the report and the launch of the report, we created the fourth in the series of Fashionscapes, which is a short documentary called Fashionscapes, A Living Wage. And it reveals the unacceptable conditions that women, particularly women, are in as they struggle to feed their families and survive in intolerable poverty. They estimate that between 60 and 80 million garment workers are in poverty because of the minimum wage set by the garment producing countries is not enough to live on. And specifically, we feel that's quite important to talk about today because Brazil produces 5.5 billion garments per year. So it's something that really, if we can take a stand within the EU and really shine a light on this topic, then potentially in the future, we can really address it across the world and make sure that everybody is lifted out of poverty. So this moving documentary shines a light on the worsening conditions for many garment workers since COVID struck and the urgent need for robust legislation to finally end poverty wages. Many of these workers are women and they've been left unprotected during the pandemic as they struggle to support themselves and their families. In November 2020, 77% of garment workers reported they experienced hunger daily, and 88% reported skipping meals and drastically reducing what they ate. So with that in mind, let's go and watch the film, and then we can follow it afterwards.
My name is Livia Firth, and for years now I've been exploring supply chains around the world, learning from and advocating for the often unseen people behind the clothes we wear every day. Today, the ongoing struggle for workers' rights and wages has become more urgent than ever. As the COVID-19 pandemic has made its way around the world, millions of garment workers have lost their jobs without warning. Stories of this enormous toll have made headlines, and what is starting to emerge more and more is the even larger system of greed and exploitation. I wanted to speak with the workers, the experts, and the activists who have been working on the front lines for decades to help better understand where we are right now and what it means to live up to the human right to a living wage. Tulsi, so nice to see you. You have been on the ground fighting against corporate greed and exploitation for so many years. So you are the perfect person to describe what has been happening.
You know, I've been thinking a lot lately about what is it that defines the fashion industry? How can we describe it in a nutshell? And for me, it's been the great promise of bringing women out of poverty, of being able to create a level of equality. But what it's really led to is the biggest inequality that we've seen. We've got 60 to 80 million women who are not earning enough to live on.
What has happened in the last few months, last 12, 14 months because of COVID?
You know, we're already facing destitution. 70% of workers were facing hunger, which is really hard to fathom. Most workers said that they were more scared of starving than they were of COVID. And they were scared of COVID. And I think that really shows to you the level of stress that was putting on workers, because as the stores started to close across the developed world, that had an instantaneous knock-on effect with workers. Suddenly, they were destitute. They never earned enough to live on to be able to ensure that they had any kind of economic buffer. So they were essentially left out in the cold.
ហេតុអីបានត្រូវប៉ះពាល់នៅពេលដែលចូលកូវីដមករោងចក្រត្រូវបានបិទទៀតអត់មានការងារធ្វើអត់មានការកម្មង់ទិញអញ្ចឹងពេលដែលបិទរោងចក្រយើងកំពុងតែជាពាក់គេស្រាប់ផងយើងកំពុងតែចំណូលតិចផងហើយត្រូវចំណាយច្រើនខ្ញុំហើយសម្រាប់ហានិភ័យរបស់ខ្ញុំនៅធ្វើការស៊ីថ្ងៃរាល់ថ្ងៃគឺទៅទាំងការភ័យខ្លាចអាសាអីគឺខ្ញុំត្រូវការលុយដើម្បីយកមកផ្គត់ផ្គង់គ្រួសារដើម្បីយកមកទិញកទិញហូបសម្រាប់ចិញ្ចឹមកូនរបស់ខ្ញុំก็ทำงานเยอะเวลางานเยอะเราก็จะไม่มีเวลากินข้าวส่งต่อเวลาเพราะว่าเราต้องเร่งงานอ่ะเพื่อที่จะได้ให้มันเสร็จเร็วเราก็ได้รับค่าตอบแทนอยู่ก็พอดีแหละค่ะพอดีเป๊ะเลยก็เพียงพอก็คือแบบพอดีค่าใช้จ่ายทั้งหมดก็คือพอดีก็ไม่เหลือเก็บ
Brands today often pay less for products made than they did a decade ago. And as clothing consumption and production speeds up, followed by rising costs of living, wages in garment-producing countries today remain shockingly low.
তাহলে হচ্ছে সব জিনিসের দাম বৃদ্ধি তাহলে আমাদের কেন দাম বাড়বে না দেখা উচিত, তাহলে সে বুঝতে পারবে যে জিনিসটা কোথা থেকে আসছে এবং শ্রমিকের কত কষ্ট হয়েছে ওই জিনিসটা তৈরি করতে। খাওয়া নাই, দাওয়া নাই, সে হচ্ছে ওইটার পিছিয়ে শ্রম দিতেছে। না, সেটা দিয়ে কখনোই আমার জীবন চলে না, কারণ একটা সংসারে অনেক টাকা খরচ হয়। আগে যেই চালের বস্তা আমরা কিনছি হচ্ছে আপনার 1700-1800 টাকা দিয়ে, এখন সেই চালের বস্তায় কিনতে হয় 3000 টাকা দিয়ে। তাহলে কিভাবে আমরা চলবো? আমাদের বেতন তো ওই তুলনায় বাড়ে নাই। তো আমরাও তো একটা মানুষ, তারপরেও শ্রম দেই কেন? পেটের দায়। আসলে বর্তমানে আমাদের যেই বেতন, কারণ আমরা কিন্তু হচ্ছে কাজ করছি, দিন রাত কাজ করছি, আমরা এমনও দিন গেছে আগে চেয়ে এখন আমাদের বেশি প্রেশার যাইতেছে, কিন্তু সেই ক্ষেত্রে কিন্তু আমরা কোনোই বেনিফিট পাচ্ছি না, কারণ হচ্ছে আমাদের কাজ বেশি করতেছি, টাকা কম।
We never ever found a living wage in garment producing countries. It was generally between 40 and 50% of what was needed for a basic, decent life.
So first of all, what is a living wage? Because there is a minimum wage and then there is a living wage.
So a minimum wage should not be less than a living wage, for obvious reasons, because a living wage is the wage necessary to sustain a basic, decent life.
I started working for this industry when I was 12 years old. I went to the factory with my 10-year-old brother. And that was not my choice that, oh, just leave the factory and go to the, just leave the school and go to the factory. I had to go because my father was the primary earner and he got ill, so there is no one who can bring food in the table for 7.
From a child laborer to a fierce and effective voice fighting for the rights of garment workers, Kalpona now leads the Bangladesh Center for Workers' Solidarity based in Dhaka.
If my mom would get a living wage, I would be not ending up a child labor in the factory. So I'll be making $6 a month, working over 400 hours. So that is my life. I need to be stood up in 16 or 18 hours in my feet because I was helper, so there was no sitting, slapped by the supervisor, kicked by them. So our factory was like towards the end of Dhaka, like in Uttora in those days. And folks came in the town, so they were being educating workers about their law and rights, and also, helping them to sue the factory owner when they illegally fired. I came to that level of training. It was 4 hours long, which has completely changed my life. I consider it a second born for me. And I learned that I'm supposed to work 8 hours. My overtime should be double than general hour. I'm supposed to not slap in the factory floor. They cannot bully me in the factory. And something beautiful I learned, that I have right to organize and I have right to bargain. There is no cheap clothes. There is nothing cheap. Someone always needs to pay for that. And who is it? That is worker.
Workers aren't accidentally in poverty. Workers are in poverty because the system was created to keep them in poverty. It didn't just put them in poverty and leave them there. They're sustaining a growing workforce of people in poverty because that's the intention of it. And there is nothing that exists at this point to say to brands, you have to lift the wage. And for too long, particularly with a living wage, brands haven't been willing to accept that it is indeed a fundamental human right.
And also you talked about normalizing the fact that they live in poverty, but in a way the brands managed to normalize the conversation around how difficult it is to pay a living wage. I've been to so many conferences and panels where the brands, represented from every single fast fashion brand would say, but we really want to, and we're committing to, but You spoke about a commitment to try and promise a basic living wage. What does that mean? How do you define a fair living wage in Bangladesh? What does that mean? And I have a pilot project in 3 factories, and by 2018, 15% of your factories are going to have that. It's not good enough. It's not.
It's very clear for us that what a living wage is something that the workers should say. And that's incorporated in our way of working.
How much is it?
And that's not for us to say a sum, but we do an assessment all the time.
How much is
to
it?
make sure that it covers the basic needs of the workers.
Thousands of pages have been written and conferences held arguing about, is it $1 or $1.50 for this country? And what struck me was that was, in a way, just an excuse for not dealing with the problem. So what I wanted to do was take the discussion away from the question of what is the monetary value of a living wage, onto how do we ensure that there is a living wage. We looked at the European Union's legislation that applied outside of the European Union. And we found various areas where the European Union had legislated with effect outside its borders, but where there was nothing were rules about how people should be treated in relation to products that we consume. So the EU could legislate for monetary issues, but not for people issues. There has to be legal rules that cover this area. You can't deal with all these issues by way of voluntary agreements.
What began as curiosity has led to a new legal framework for holding European-based brands accountable for wages paid during production and enforced at the point of import, where violators could face steep fines and legal consequences to avoiding responsibility for the workers on which they continue to build their profits. This soon-to-be proposed legislation to the EU could become a game changer for workers and could set up a powerful new precedent for what's possible around the world. What would you like women who buy clothes on the high street in London, in Rome, in New York, in Madrid, in Paris to know?
We all need these jobs, but we want them with dignity. A dignity doesn't come until we have a living wage. We need a dignified job. It is that simple.
As a lawyer, I know that people can argue anything. It's always possible to make an argument, and it's even possible to believe your own argument. But fundamentally, if you actually have to face the human being who is living in endless poverty, in relentless poverty, in poverty that will not end, I would say to those CEOs, make that argument to that worker, to their face. Make that argument to the person who is suffering.
There is power in us together. There's power in the collective. And workers know that all the time. You know, when workers are fighting for better conditions in a factory, they're not doing it as individuals. They're doing it together. They're doing it together as a collective, you know, because that's what expressing solidarity means. It means your struggle is my struggle. Enough is enough. The destitution of garment workers, no one is okay with that. And brands need to wake up and realize no one is okay validating your profits anymore. We don't feel comfortable with it, and you're gonna have to change it. It feels like the clock is ticking.
A new chapter is beginning. I can feel it. A deep knowing that the time for awareness has passed, and that the great opportunity before us now is for true transformation. As we join the fight, fueled by workers everywhere, relentless in the belief that a human life is worth far more than the unpaid cost of cheap clothes.
on mute as usual, thanks to Zoom. Every time I watch that film, you can't help but just be moved by what's happening around us every day and what we're able to close our eyes to all the time. I just wanted to go to Jessica for a moment and ask, really, what drove you to go down this path of really investigating the legal side of the fundamental right to a living wage for everybody, and how did the report come about and what that kind of process was?
Thank you, Harriet, and thank you for having me today. Before I answer that, can I just say that Rio, of course, for so many of us who've never even been to Rio, means a huge amount. The Earth Summit of, I can't believe it's 30 years ago, but you know, the Earth Summit of 1992 was when I was a sort of activist student, and it's incredibly important and resonates. And it is incredible to think that 30 years has passed since the first Earth Summit. And to wonder whether we have made progress or whether the world really has suffered from the increasing expansion of globalization. And I suppose, Harriet, in answer to your question, I first got involved in this as a result of a film called The True Cost, which was also made by Andrew Morgan and Livia, and is a wonderful film. It gives much more detail than this smaller film that's just been made, but I really recommend you watch it. You can find it online. And it struck me when I saw that film that this was really a problem that was completely solvable. This is not a problem like climate change, which, you know, climate change is obviously solvable too, but it's much more complex. Well, this problem is actually a decision. You either pay people properly or you don't. It's simply a human decision. It's not something that's been caused by creation of an energy dependence or a particular kind of economy. We know that the economics of fashion mean that people can be paid properly, and at the same time brands can make a profit, and perhaps consumers have to pay a little more, but perhaps they don't, just the profit has to be slightly less for the companies. This is a completely feasible situation. And so we set about examining how you could solve the problem. And we've been through 3 stages. We had a first report that looked at living wages or wages in garment producing countries. And then our second report looked at legislation that applied in the EU, as said in the film, outside of the EU. And the third stage is actually a proposal. Now, it is a proposal for EU legislation. And to that extent, its relevance in Brazil is, I suppose, twofold. First, Brazil is a very big garment producing country. I understand it produces 5.5 billion garments. Harriet, did you say a year?
Yeah, a year.
So it's an enormous, I assume it's a large part of Brazil's economy. Brazil, of course, is also a wealthy country and therefore has consumers as well who are affected, not just workers. So the legislation could affect Brazil in the sense that its objective is to force countries to raise their minimum wage. And Harriet, I don't know whether it's a good moment for me just to introduce what the proposal is.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I think.
So the proposal really is intended to tackle what is a market failure, which is the mobility of demand for labour and the excessive supply for labour in this sector. And it seems to us that whilst the problem of poverty wages isn't confined to the garment and footwear industry, it is an industry that is particularly affected. And of course, as we've already said, women are hugely affected. So it is a good place to start. And it's also possible that the fashion industry can actually be a leader in pushing up wages and instrumental in the changes of wages in other sectors like electronics, where there are also problems. But female labour is essentially treated as a commodity, like water or timber or any primary resource. and the purchaser of that labour moves from one market to another, seeking the cheapest source of labour. And we say that this market behaviour ignores the most basic principle, which is that labour is not a commodity. It's not water or timber or iron. It's the means by which human beings should be able to achieve a decent life and improve their prospects and the prospects of their dependents. And we say that the economy has no purpose save to improve the well-being of the people that it serves. So the core is that the right to a minimum wage is the right to a basic wage to sustain a decent life. And that was explicitly recognised in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 and has been repeatedly set out in many international human rights agreements and treaties. So nobody should be paid so little that they cannot sustain themselves and their family. And this is recognised and deeply rooted in international human rights law, which is founded on the idea of human dignity. And our idea is that the problem of the mobility of demand and the excessive supply is that retailers move from one jurisdiction to another or from one factory to another looking for the lowest labour price. And the objective of the legislation is to reverse that structural problem, effectively to create an incentive whereby it's good for countries to increase their minimum wage to a level that allows for a decent life. Now, the heart of the idea is that we're looking at it essentially from the European market. The Commission, which is a sort of the executive civil service of the EU, would work out what is a living wage in each garment producing country. So in connection with Brazilian authorities, the International Labour Organization, it would look at Brazil and take, say, a basket of goods and rental properties, education, health, and work out what is really the lowest possible threshold that could be paid to a worker for the worker to live a decent life. And then if the Brazilian minimum wage was not in excess of that level, and I looked it up just before our meeting today, and as I understand it, the minimum statutory wage in Brazil is 1,100 real, which comes to about $211 per month. So, I mean, you'll be able to tell me better, but I assume that that really does fall below a living wage. If that was the case, then Brazil would go on to an annex to the relevant regulation. And the consequence of being on such an annex would be that if a retailer based or selling within the EU sourced its goods from Brazil, then it would have to comply with heightened due diligence requirements. And there would be potential criminal sanctions and civil sanctions for board members. And one of those due diligence requirements would be that it ensured that the workers that made its goods were paid above that threshold level that had been set by the Commission. And we hope that the consequence of that would be that, first of all, governments themselves would have an interest in pushing the minimum wage up to that threshold. And secondly, in the more short term, factories themselves would ensure that they were paying workers above that threshold. Because one of the things that we've been told by retailers or brands is that they can't guarantee that their workers get enough money because they only order one particular thing within a factory. So say they order 2,000 jeans, the workers obviously are paid for all the other contracts. But if factories knew that they wouldn't get any contracts from European retailers if their workers in general were not paid above that threshold level we think that would create an incentive for them to push the wage levels up. And of course, it would also mean that a country could get off the list, because as soon as your minimum statutory wage was above that threshold, you'd no longer be on the annex as a country. And therefore, the retailers would know that if they used, say, Brazil, because it was not on that list, those extra due diligence requirements with the extra risks of criminal penalties and fines wouldn't arise at all. So that's, I don't know whether it was a good moment, Harriet. I kind of jumped in, but that kind of explains the proposal as a whole. And you'll find it in our report, which we'll put up on the chat, or perhaps it can be put out somewhere.
I'll add it into the chat. And actually, we just had a question from the audience asking how one can define what the minimum wage of a country should be. So it's actually the living wage, which I think is what you've just answered there. And just to add to that one, someone has asked, if minimum wages defined by many governments aren't rightly measured, established, shouldn't the private sector work together to adjust it? And I think that comes back to your other point, because I was looking on H&M's website this morning, for example, who in that documentary you saw said to Livia on stage, we're going to be paying the living wage by 2018. They're still not, and they still state on their website that they're unable to do that because they don't own the factories, therefore cannot control how much their workers are paid.
Exactly.
So so this is really interesting about this making it legal. Is that the only way you think that this problem can be solved?
Yeah. And also we realize obviously there is no way that the EU can legislate for other countries, but somehow it has to flip the incentive. The current incentive is both for factories and governments to keep their minimum wages low, keep their wages low. So the whole idea behind the proposal is to say, look, if you get off the list, you're not on the annex to this regulation, then brands are really going to prefer to use you, because then they won't be subject to the additional due diligence requirements and the risks of fines and sanctions. That's the fundamental idea behind it, is that we just flip the incentive.
Which is great. And then coming to Marisa, and something that struck me, it was a couple of years ago when Jessica did the first report, and she was on stage at the EU, and someone said, oh, it's a broken system, how do we fix? And Jessica, you turned around and said, in fact, this is not a broken system, it's the perfect system. It's the perfect system which is set up so that brands get profitable, they are profitable while all of the risk is put on the supply chain. So everything, they're not accountable for anything within the supply chain. Hence, H&M is able to sit there and say, oh, well, you know, we just don't own those factories. There's nothing we can do. So, and that brings us to Marisa, who runs North Sales, CEO of North Sales. And in fact, Marisa enabled this entire documentary to be produced. So if it wasn't for Marisa and for a brand stepping up and saying, this is really important, we might not know how to solve it tomorrow because we do produce across the globe, but we want to, and we want to play our part. So really, Marisa, tell us why this was so important to you, and why you are one of the few brands globally, has to be said, willing to really push this into the limelight.
Harriet, first of all, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And definitely it was my true honor and North Sales honor to be part of this amazing team, putting a voice in the industry and in the market. Well, I think, you know, I've been in the fashion business for a long time now. And I keep telling my friends that the only reason why I'm still in fashion is because I'm really committed to sustainability as a whole. And I think that's the only reason that really keeps me motivating about each collection every season. Because I believe, you know, I think overall leadership in the fashion industry is responsible to do as much as they can, and I keep saying as much as they can, because no brand probably is perfect at this point, but every season we need to make sure that everything that we do towards the industry is getting step forward in sustainability for the planet and for the people. And this is a point I want to make. You know, in the last few years, there's been a lot of talk on sustainability. Everybody's talking about how much recycled material you have, how much organic cotton, you know, how the dyeing is going to be like more safe and less water consumption. And there is no way there's going to be sustainability without the area of people and making sure that they're being taken care of as much as the planet. I mean, it's both of them, you know. And so, you know, I come from previous companies where this piece of conversation we're having today, the social part, was very important. I worked many, many years ago for you know, companies like Levi's, for example, many years when nobody really talked much about stuff like this. And I think it is really up to us to make sure that we make the right decisions. I mean, I respect what H&M is saying in the website, but I think, you know, it is our decision whether we place an order in one supplier or not. So if that supplier is not meeting the right standards for the people that work there, we have the right to say, thank you very much, I'm going somewhere else, you know? So, and I think that is the brave decision. And sometimes it's a very tough decision because yes, it does impact the P&L, it does impact your final margin, but I don't think there should be even a question about it. There shouldn't even be a question. I mean, that is non-negotiable. Like, it's non-negotiable to open a store that you're going to be cheap in some of the materials and you're going to end up having security issues and health and safety issues. So to me, it's a point that is not even, it shouldn't be even questioned. And so I understand we all need to make money and make the company profitable, but there are other KPIs that we need to touch, you know, and it is part of the beginning of when you design a collection, you know, how many styles, what's the price positioning, what's your margin. And then based on all that, there are materials you can afford, there's details you can afford, there's graphics you can afford. And to me, those are the areas that we need to be looking at to make sure that we deliver the right margin. As I said, I do respect everybody else, but I think it is our responsibility. You know, we're talking a lot about the planet. I'm super committed. You know, North Sales is all about protecting the ocean. We're really committed to, you know, making sure the corals are alive. The ocean is, you know, it's healthy, but definitely, you know, who works with us or for us is a key priority for all of us. So the only thing I can say is, as I said before, no company is perfect. We are not perfect. Every season we try to get better and better. We have our suppliers that we actually make them follow a code of conduct. And we do audits behind and we make sure that things are happening. And we hope that those suppliers don't subcontract other suppliers, which is a lot of the issue that we have in the industry. You think you have the right partner and then somehow they're producing somewhere else. But it shouldn't be part of the brief that you need to go to that supplier so that you can hit your margin.
Thank you. And you are doing a great job.
Thank you very much.
And that being said, it is not a simple thing for a brand that does want to do the right thing to turn around and say, let's clean up our supply chain tomorrow. But would you consider things like blockchain, for example? Someone's asked a question just now. Would that help with wage traceability?
Absolutely. And I mean, we're definitely not there yet. And we need to be. It's part of, you know, part of our budgets as well. You have to invest on that. You have to have the right technology and you have to have the right investment on it. But I believe very, very, very soon, whoever is not on that track is going to be behind in the industry. So I'm really hoping it is a must. You know, and if I may, Harriet, go back to the whole fabric and sustainability on products. More and more, the consumers are really demanding that. I've seen it in companies that I've worked for. You know, the consumers saying, where did you produce this? Why is this sustainable? Why is this recycled? How do you do that? And I think, you know, as I said, responsibility is on us because we're the ones, you know, producing and distributing the collections. But the more the consumer pushes up, the faster the brands are going to have to make a difference. Because when you have consumers really asking and really pushing the brands and getting on social media and, you know, having a voice, then the brands will have no choice, because that's what is happening now with materials and the production itself of products. And it has to be the same with people.
Thank you. And actually, we've just had a question which asks, Brazil is one of the largest cotton exporters in the world, but exports a few final products. It's more of the raw material here that's affecting. And how can we start this fight for decent work here too? Maybe one for Jessica.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I don't know exactly how, well, I don't know how the minimum wage works in Brazil. I know that in some countries, different minimum wages are fixed for different sectors. But obviously our hope is that, our proposal is relatively narrow, because we're starting by just looking at the last stage in the supply chain, so just the cut and sew stage. But if the large markets like Europe or the US start having systems whereby products produced at below wages that are below a decent wage have more difficulty accessing the market, and there are difficult problems around trade law in relation to that. But we hope that the consequence will be that governments in countries like Brazil will increase the statutory minimum wage. Now, of course, there is still going to be exploitation, because the ability to even enforce law is fairly diminished in this kind of labor area. But it will be much easier for people buying, say they're buying cotton from Brazil, if at least they know that theoretically the minimum wage in Brazil is higher. They can then, for example, assist workers in bringing actions or themselves enforce that minimum wage. So I think it is key. Legislation on minimum wage in every country is at least an important starting point for this.
And just to add to that, I think as it's World Environment Day, there's a lot of moves at the moment, a lot of the brands we're working on towards biodiversity and regenerative farming. And as we move into that area, as more brands realize, because as Marisa said, the environment and the social side go together hand in hand. As more brands realize they have to look after their raw materials and the planet, then you have to look after the people that go with that as well. So as we establish more regenerative agriculture, as the cotton industry gets better, as we start to use less chemicals, we're looking after workers, brands are now actively sourcing these projects, which makes them look better to their consumer, because their consumers are asking more questions. It ensures that the living wage is paid, because you have to pay that premium for regenerative agriculture. So hopefully we're moving into that sphere at the moment, and the faster we can go, the better. But as Marisa says, things can't change overnight. They do take time. It takes time to change the soil. I heard an awful statistic the other day where we have 60 years left of soil fertility before it's no good to any of us in the world. So as we start to make these steps, as we start to pay people fairly, as we start to look after the planet in a better way, hopefully everything will come together, and we will all have, everybody will share in a socially just and economically inclusive planet.
Well, the other thing is that paying people properly may result, I don't know, Marisa, you'd be in a better position to say this, but it may result in less consumption, higher wages and less consumption, which ultimately is better for the environment and which is better for people.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's right, Marisa.
Yeah, it is a really good point, because I think it's, again, part of that conversation about fast fashion not being the right path for the planet. So it's about buying less, but buying better, Talking about statistics, Harriet, I like to share one that goes with social and the planet. Everybody, well, in the industry, we all talk about a t-shirt takes around 2,700 liters of water to be produced, just one t-shirt, okay? those number of liters, if we think about all of us drinking like 8 small cups of water a day, that will actually be the water for one person for 3.5 years. Okay, so when you think about somebody buying a t-shirt for €5 and saying, this is great, I'll just wear it 3 times and then throw it away, there's many issues with that. One is obviously, please be aware that you're throwing away 2,700 liters of water after 3 days of using something that eventually we know there's going to be water shortage in the world. So that's an issue. But the other part, which relates to this conversation, is a t-shirt for €5, it's just not possible to produce, so again, there's some women in some amazing countries that are paying for it, as the film was saying. So I think, again, I talk a lot about the education of people in a good way, I didn't know a lot of things that I know now when I'm getting into the whole sustainability fashion world. So I'm getting educated every day. And I think there's a way that, this amazing film is, making a big voice on the issue, but all of us are responsible to quote these numbers and to talk about this around, either conferences, our teams, educating all the company all the way down, talking to everybody in big conferences, because I think once people are aware of this, I think it's more difficult to buy that €5 t-shirt. Once I think there's a bit of guilt inside and maybe you won't do it. And I think that's a big, important thing that we should all do, try to get the voice out there, and people bit by bit will change. I'm seeing change, I'm an optimistic. And I think, unfortunately, with the COVID situation, people more and more are realizing that, there's more than just fast fashion, and they're looking for values, and they're looking for companies with purpose. And I'm hoping that the mistake that sometimes humans have done in the past, that we have short memory, in the history, hopefully we'll learn from this, and this time we'll build on this maybe lower consumption, but buying better and paying the right price.
You're completely right. And I think we have time for one more question, which is for you, Marisa.
Okay.
How did North Sales start this process, and what difficulties is the company facing?
This process, the whole process with, I'm assuming with
I think they're referring, to the sustainability, the process that.
Okay. Well, North Sales started, I think it started like 4 years ago, more around making the collections more and more sustainable. And they've always been definitely very strict on the whole social code of conduct. And they've been changing a lot before my time, the production. So currently we have production in Asia, and we have production in Europe. And we follow the same standards across. We are very focused. In the last year, we've been very, very focused on making our collections more and more sustainable. And that's what I say, it's about how you move on. So just to give some numbers, for example, our collection in spring, summer, it had around 34% of it in what we call sustainable, around, recycled materials, organic cotton, less usage of water, etc. And autumn, winter is moving to 85%, spring, summer 22 would be 95%. So the whole company is really focused in driving that sustainable approach. On one hand, because we think it's the right thing to do. Secondly, because we believe consumers are wanting that more and more. And thirdly, and not in that ranking, the 3 are as important, is because we're really committed to the ocean conservation. And, most our marketing and communication campaign is based on protecting the oceans in everything that we can. So we just drive our voice through amazing ambassadors that are really committed, which is now, for example, we actually are partnering with coral gardeners, which are these amazing people in the French Polynesia planting corals. So basically, when you are, buying North Sales, we're actually committing part of that into planting corals that build the ocean. As you probably heard, by 2050, they say that corals may be the first ecosystem that disappears, which will affect 25% of marine life, and it will definitely affect humans. So as I said, again, we're managing the people and planet as our main focus, really. That's what we're working on. And we have a lot of work ahead. We still have a long path, but it's definitely very, fulfilling to see that we are getting better and better every season.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And it is amazing because it is a journey. And
it is a journey
doing it.
Yeah, and I think, I can say that, as I said before, we all are getting educated. Everybody needs to get educated because we're all learning. And in that journey, I mean, I got to say, as part of what are we doing? I mean, we're definitely partnering with EcoAge, and we feel amazingly happy with that. And they're really helping us to get better and better. And I think that the formula, I think, is associate yourself with the right partners, because nobody has the right answers. Nobody has the full formula. And I think it's about making sure you get with the right partners on that path, and that, you lean on each other and make sure that people and companies keep learning and getting better at what they do. And then we need the law, Jessica. So we need your help to make people really follow the rules in every in companies and in countries.
Absolutely. I've just so everyone's aware, I've shared a link to the report that Jessica created in the chat. I think I've shared it with Carol because technology goes beyond me if I have to go any further with that to share. And then I just wanted to finish by saying thank you so much for joining us today. And I really hope that it sort of gives you things to think about, and also to use, as in the words of Livia, to all become active citizens and all play our part, because every little part counts. So if it's, as Marisa said, posting on a brand's social media to ask a question, if it's challenging some in a store about what you think they are paid, it all does matter, because sometimes we can feel a little bit helpless that nothing matters and we've got no power of change. It really does. So thank you very much, and thank you for watching this afternoon, and encourage you all to watch The True Cost as well if you haven't already.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.